Look at the number on your latest paycheck. Now look at your bank account on the 28th of the month. The math is broken. You are earning a salary your parents would have considered the pinnacle of financial security, yet you are operating closer to the edge of bankruptcy than they ever did. You do not feel poor. You have a job. Maybe you have two. You followed the blueprint, moved to the right city, acquired the right skills, and secured the raise. But somehow, you have less to show for it today than you did 5 years ago. You are not imagining this. You are trapped in a highly engineered, geographic and financial paradox. A paradox where making more money mathematically guarantees you have less breathing room. And here is the terrifying part that no financial planner wants to admit on television. We are rapidly approaching a mathematical breaking point. A structural horizon where the baseline cost of simply keeping a human being alive outpaces the maximum wage a modern corporation is willing to pay them. What happens when those two lines permanently cross? The answer to that is going to rewrite the rules of society over the next 5 years, and I will show you exactly what that catastrophic shift looks like by the end of this film. But to understand the disaster waiting for us, you first have to understand the mechanics of the illusion you are living in right now. Let us dismantle the most dangerous lie in modern economics, the illusion of the rising wage. The government and corporate press love to celebrate nominal wage growth. They tell you your paycheck grew by 10% over the last 3 years. That sounds like a victory. It is actually a death sentence. Because if the non-negotiable costs of your survival, meaning shelter, food, healthcare, and childcare, grew by 20% in that exact same window, you are not 10% wealthier. You are 10% closer to falling off a cliff. Your wage is just the ink on your pay stub. Your purchasing power is the brutal reality of what that ink can actually extract from the physical world. And your purchasing power is evaporating. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics hides this evaporation behind a statistical sleight of hand. When economists report the overall inflation rate, they are feeding you an average. They throw everything into a massive blender. They mix the plummeting price of flat-screen televisions, imported furniture and streaming subscriptions with the exploding costs of rent, insulin, and car insurance. The average looks completely manageable, but you do not live in the average. You cannot opt out of heating your home to buy a cheaper television. You cannot skip a month of rent because a new laptop went on sale. The costs that keep you alive are entirely non-negotiable, and those specific categories have not just moved faster than the headline inflation rate, they have detached from economic reality completely. This brings us to the trap of disinflation. Read the financial news right now, and you will see politicians taking victory laps because inflation is cooling down. This is a fundamental manipulation of language. Cooling inflation does not mean things are getting cheaper. It simply means the rate at which you are being financially bled has slowed from a sprint to a jog. A gallon of milk that cost $3 in 2019 and spiked to $5 during a supply shock does not return to $3 when inflation cools. It permanently stays at $5. The damage is locked in. It becomes the new baseline. Every cumulative price increase from the last several years of crisis is now a permanent fixture of your reality, while the wages meant to cover those exact costs are crawling behind, completely exhausted. The gap between those two lines is not just an abstract economic concept, it is the exact measure of your daily anxiety. And this is exactly where the geography of the modern economy turns against you. We are told to move to where the jobs are, but the geographic hubs that offer the highest wages are precisely engineered to extract every single cent of that premium through the fixed cost of survival. Economists call this the fixed cost trap. Think of your monthly budget as a pipeline. At the top, your hard-earned income flows in. At the bottom, the absolute essentials drain out before you even have time to think. Rent, utilities, health premiums, commuting costs. These are not choices. They are the admission tickets to participate in modern society. When these fixed costs consume 30% of your pipeline, you can breathe, you can save, you can handle an emergency. But when those non-negotiable costs quietly inflate to consume 60, 70, or 80% of your take-home pay, the pipeline chokes. Every remaining dollar is violently fought over by groceries, medical care, and savings. and savings always loses. You are forced to defend the present by sacrificing your future. This is not the result of you buying too much coffee. This is a structural collapse of the margin of survival, and you are sitting right at ground zero. The economic engine driving this deficit was not created by accident. It is the result of 50 years of deliberate policy decisions, zoning laws, and monetary mechanics that systematically converted basic human survival needs into yield-generating financial assets. To trace the origin of the current cost of living crisis, one must look directly at the year 1971. When the United States severed the dollar's link to gold, it fundamentally altered the relationship between human labor and capital accumulation. Before 1971, worker productivity and compensation moved in near-perfect lockstep. As workers produced more goods and services per hour, their real wages grew proportionately, allowing a single income earner to purchase a medium-priced home, support a family, and secure a pension without relying on revolving credit. Following 1971, those two metrics detached permanently. Data from the Economic Policy Institute reveals that between 1979 and 2023, net productivity increased by over 64%, while real worker compensation grew by a meager 14%. The vast financial surplus generated by increased labor efficiency did not flow into paychecks. Instead, it flowed directly into financial markets, corporate balance sheets, and real estate assets. This structural decoupling marked the beginning of an era where wealth was no longer generated primarily through labor, but through asset ownership. While wages stagnated, local municipal governments across the United States quietly laid the groundwork for a massive artificial housing scarcity. Following World War II, suburban municipalities implemented exclusionary single-family zoning regulations. By making multifamily housing, duplexes, and apartment complexes illegal on up to 75% of residential land in major American metropolitan areas, cities capped the supply of housing by law. This regulatory choice transformed real estate from a functional commodity that naturally depreciates over time into a protected investment vehicle designed to appreciate perpetually. The structural deficit exploded following the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. When the subprime mortgage bubble collapsed, the private home-building industry experienced a historic crash. Thousands of independent construction firms went bankrupt, skilled tradespeople exited the labor force permanently, and bank financing for residential development evaporated. According to data from the Federal Reserve and the United States Census Bureau, the nation underbuilt housing by millions of units relative to historical population growth throughout the 2010s. Between 2012 and 2023, the U.S. economy added roughly 15.6 million households, but only 11.9 million residential units were completed, leaving an absolute structural deficit exceeding 4 million homes. This multi-million unit deficit created a captive market for residential landlords. In 2020, as central banks lowered interest rates to zero and pumped trillions of dollars of liquidity into global money markets, institutional private equity funds recognized a unique arbitrage opportunity. Armed with virtually free capital, firms began acquiring single-family neighborhoods and multifamily residential complexes en masse. They did not enter the residential housing market to build new inventory, but to capture the rental yield of a captive population that was structurally locked out of home ownership. The math underlying this transition is brutal. Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies reports that as of 2024, a record 22.7 million renter households in the United States were officially classified as cost-burdened, spending more than 30% of their gross income on rent and utilities. Of that total, 12.1 million households were severely cost-burdened, surrendering more than 50% of their income every single month directly to shelter. Over the decade between 2014 and 2024, the market lost over 7 million low-rent units, charging under $1,000 per month, replacing them exclusively with high-end, luxury units designed to maximize investor cash flow. National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Simultaneously, the cost of healthcare and higher education followed a similar exponential trajectory due to regulatory capture and administrative bloat. Data from the Kaiser Family Foundation demonstrates that the average annual premium for employer-sponsored family health coverage surpassed $24,000, representing a 50% increase over a 10-year span that dramatically outpaced general wage growth. Deductibles for single coverage more than doubled over the same period, forcing middle-class families to pay thousands out of pocket before their contractual insurance benefits provided any financial coverage. The systemic result is a classic geographic trap. Modern economic activity has concentrated high-paying professional jobs in a handful of major Tier 1 and Tier 2 metropolitan areas. However, these exact cities feature the most restrictive zoning regimes, the highest local tax burdens, and the most severely inflated housing costs. Workers are confronted with an impossible geographic choice. They can remain in lower-cost rural areas where the supply of living-wage employment is rapidly disappearing, or they can relocate to high-productivity economic hubs where 70% of their net earnings are immediately extracted by fixed survival costs. The higher salary on paper becomes an illusion, neutralized by the physical geography of asset inflation. The friction between stagnant real compensation and fixed mandatory expenses has escalated into an operational crisis across the domestic economy. Millions of households earning above the national median are now relying on secondary credit instruments to bridge monthly liquidity deficits. According to official reporting from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, total U.S. credit card debt surpassed $1.13 trillion, reaching an all-time statistical high. Simultaneously, aggregate household debt swelled beyond $17.5 trillion. Average credit card annual percentage rates have climbed past 21%, the highest nominal level recorded since the Federal Reserve began tracking the metric in 1994. This reliance on short-term high-interest credit is no longer driven primarily by discretionary lifestyle spending, but by non-negotiable household expenditures. Data published by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau indicates a sharp rise in the utilization of buy now, pay later financial services for routine grocery purchases and utility payments. The structural shift from using credit as a convenience to using credit as an essential survival buffer demonstrates that modern household income is insufficient to cover basic monthly operational overhead. The pressure on the domestic food supply chain provides a clear view of how systemic cost increases directly alter consumer behavior. Department of Labor price indexes confirm that food-at-home costs rose by over 25% across a multi-year period, driven by compound fuel prices, global supply chain dislocations, and corporate margin expansion. Consumer packaged goods conglomerates successfully implemented price hikes that outpaced underlying input cost inflation, sustaining record net profit margins while consumer volume declined. The corporate strategy of shrinkflation, reducing the net physical weight or volume of product packaging while maintaining or increasing the retail price, became standard operating practice across major consumer brands. Analysis from the Bureau of Labor Statistics revealed measurable volume decreases in household items, ranging from paper goods to prepackaged proteins. The practical result is a compounding erosion of household purchasing power that is frequently underreported in raw price index data, as families receive less physical utility per dollar spent. This structural squeeze extends directly into the domestic auto sector and commuting logistics. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis reports that the average price of a new light vehicle surpassed $47,000, while average used vehicle prices remained elevated well above pre-pandemic baselines. Rising interest rates pushed the average monthly payment for a new car loan past $730 per month, with more than 15% of new buyers signing contracts exceeding $1,000 per month. Subprime auto loan delinquency rates rising past 6% reflect severe distress among lower and middle-income commuters who require personal motor vehicles to reach physical job sites. The childcare market represents another major operational bottleneck for working parents. A national report from Childcare Aware of America established that the annual cost of infant care in center-based facilities now exceeds the average cost of in-state public university tuition in 41 U.S. states and the District of Columbia. In major metro areas, Full-time care for 2 children regularly exceeds $30,000 annually. This expenditure forces dual-income families to evaluate whether the net secondary wage, after taxes, commuting, and professional overhead, generates any meaningful economic yield. To compensate for these systemic pressures, the modern labor market has experienced a significant expansion in multi-job holders. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that over 8 million American workers currently hold multiple jobs simultaneously. This structural trend is particularly prevalent among full-time salaried workers, taking on evening gig economy shifts in food delivery or rideshare platforms to maintain basic solvency. The additional hours worked do not result in wealth accumulation or long-term financial security, but serve exclusively to service existing debt loads and cover immediate fixed bills. The systemic consequence of this environment is the emergence of financial defensiveness, where long-term capital formation gives way to immediate risk mitigation. The Federal Reserve's survey of household economics and decision-making continues to show that over 37% of American adults lack the cash reserves to cover an unexpected $400 emergency expense without using credit or liquidating physical assets. The margin for operational error has collapsed across the middle class, converting ordinary life events, such as minor medical interventions, mechanical vehicle repairs, or home maintenance, into major financial shocks that disrupt household stability for years.